Professor Bren adjusted his temperature regulator with a dismissive flick of his third appendage as he paced before the grand observation window of the Galactic University's Xenobiology Lecture Hall. Outside, the three suns of the Centauri system painted the crystalline spires of the campus in brilliant hues of orange and gold. But the professor's attention was fixed firmly on the datapad in his primary hands, his scaled brow furrowed in what his species considered amusement. "And here we have yet another example of human exaggeration," he announced to his class, his voice carrying the slight whistle characteristic of his species. "They claim to have survived temperatures as low as -40 degrees on their home world, without external heating units. Can you believe such nonsense?" The lecture hall erupted in chirps, clicks, and various other sounds of alien laughter, all except for one student in the back row. Anna McKnight sat perfectly still, her hands folded neatly on her desk, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She was the only human in the entire xenobiology department, and after 3 months of Professor Bren's not-so-subtle jabs at human capabilities, she had developed what her grandmother would call a thick skin. "Tell me, class," Professor Bren continued, his secondary eyes swiveling to focus directly on Anna while his primary set remained on the datapad. "What species requires artificial climate control for 98% of known habitable worlds? Which species can only survive in the narrowest band of temperatures? Who needed to develop crude external shells just to explore their own orbital satellite?" "Humans," the class responded in unison, followed by another wave of alien laughter. Professor Bren's facial scales rippled in satisfaction. "Precisely. And yet they still apply for positions in our most prestigious exploration fleets. They still petition for colonization rights on extreme climate worlds. The audacity, the sheer determination." Anna's clear voice cut through the ambient sounds of amusement. The lecture hall fell silent. Professor Bren's 4 eyes locked onto her, his scales shifting to a deeper shade of blue. "Pardon me, Student McKnight. I believe the word you're looking for is determination." Professor Anna's smile never wavered. "Or perhaps adaptability? Resilience? We humans have quite a few words for it, actually." The professor's temperature regulator whirred as he processed her interruption. "Ah, yes, the famous human trait of, what do you call it?" Spunk, his mouth tentacles curled in what passed for a smirk. "Tell me, Student McKnight, have you ever personally survived in extreme conditions? Or are you simply quoting your species' rather creative historical records?" Anna stood up slowly, her chair making a soft scraping sound that seemed to echo in the silent hall. "My great-grandmother helped establish the first permanent research station in Antarctica. My mother currently leads geological surveys in the Siberian permafrost. And I—" She paused, meeting all 4 of his eyes with her steady gaze. "Spent every summer of my childhood learning traditional Inuit survival techniques from my father's family." Professor Bren's scales flickered briefly to a pale green, a sign of surprise he couldn't quite suppress. But he recovered quickly, his color returning to its professional blue. "How charmingly anecdotal. However, this is a scientific institution. We deal in provable facts, not family stories and primitive survival skills." "Then prove it," the words left Anna's mouth before she could stop them. The professor's secondary eyes blinked rapidly. "I beg your pardon. Set up a test, a real one. Pick your harshest ice world, your worst conditions. Let me show you what primitive human survival skills can do." The lecture hall erupted in excited chittering and buzzing. Professor Bren's scales shifted through several colors before settling on a deep, authoritative purple. "Student McKnight, are you challenging my academic assessment of human capabilities?" Anna gathered her materials, tucking them neatly into her bag. "No, Professor. I'm offering you the chance to prove your hypothesis. Isn't that what real scientists do?" As she walked toward the exit, the sounds of her classmates' agitated discussions followed her. Just before the door, she paused and turned back. "Oh, and Professor? Humans don't just survive in extreme conditions. We thrive in them. It's kind of our thing." The door whispered shut behind her, leaving Professor Bren staring at the empty doorway, his scales now cycling through colors faster than his temperature regulator could adjust. In all his years of teaching, no student had ever dared to. This would require a response. A proper scientific response. His mouth tentacles curved into what humans would definitely not recognize as a smile. "Very well, Student McKnight," he whispered to himself. "Let's put your primitive skills to the test." The next morning, the university's central amphitheater was packed to capacity. News of the confrontation had spread faster than a quantum transmission, drawing students and faculty from every department. Professor Bren stood at the center podium, his scales gleaming under the artificial lights, all four eyes scanning the crowd with obvious satisfaction. Esteemed colleagues and students, he began, his voice amplified by the room's acoustic enhancement field. "We gather today to witness a momentous occasion in xenobiological studies, an opportunity to settle, once and for all, the question of human environmental adaptability." He gestured with his third appendage, and a holographic image of a planet appeared above the podium. Its surface was a swirling mass of white and pale blue, angry storm systems visible even from orbit. Behold, Frost 9. Average surface temperature -120 degrees. Wind speeds regularly exceeding 200 kilometers per hour. And the location of our upcoming survival trial. A murmur rippled through the crowd. In the front row, Anna sat with perfect posture, her expression neutral as she studied the hologram. "Our human student has graciously volunteered to demonstrate her species' supposed survival capabilities," Professor Bren continued, his mouth tentacles twitching with barely concealed amusement. "The challenge is simple. Survive for 10 standard hours while building a sustainable shelter. No modern technology allowed, beyond basic protective clothing." Laughter erupted from several sections of the amphitheater. A Venusian student 3 rows behind Anna leaned forward, their heat pods pulsing with mirth. "Hey human, need to borrow my thermal generator? Oh wait, that would be cheating." Professor Bren raised his primary appendages for silence. Now. Let's be scientific about this. In fact, to make things interesting, I'm opening this challenge to any student who wishes to participate. Show us your species' natural survival capabilities. The winner will receive an automatic outstanding grade in advanced xenobiology, and the satisfaction of proving their evolutionary superiority. The amphitheater erupted in excited chatter. Near the back, a group of Martian exchange students huddled together, their crystalline bodies reflecting light, as they whispered among themselves. Several Jovian students immediately signed up, their gas-based forms swirling with confidence. "Oh, this is getting good," said Blip, a blob-like European student who had somehow materialized next to Anna. "The betting pool is already up to 50,000 credits. Most bets are on how quickly you'll call for emergency extraction. I put mine on you lasting at least an hour. No offense." Anna turned to Blip with a raised eyebrow. "What are the odds on me succeeding?" Blip's gelatinous form rippled with amusement. 1,000 to 1. "Want me to place a bet for you? Since you know, humans aren't allowed to participate in interspecies gambling yet." "Make it 2,000 credits," Anna said quietly, slipping a credit chip to Blip. "On complete success." Professor Bren's voice cut through the chaos. "The trial begins tomorrow at first light. All participants must submit to a full technology scan before departure. And remember, this is more than just a simple contest. This is about establishing scientific truth about species capabilities." He fixed all 4 eyes on Anna. Some species simply aren't built for extreme survival. Accepting these biological limitations is part of mature scientific understanding. Anna stood up slowly, drawing every eye in the amphitheater. "Just one question, Professor. Does your definition of technology include knowledge passed down through generations, or are we allowed to use our brains?" The professor's scales flickered briefly to orange, a sign of irritation. "You may use whatever primitive techniques your species has developed, though I doubt ice scraping and hide wearing will be much use on Frost 9. "Perfect," Anna said, turning to leave. "Oh, and Professor, you might want to research something called an Igloo before tomorrow, just so you know what you're about to witness." As she walked out, the betting terminals lit up with fresh wagers. Blip's amorphous form wobbled with excitement as they placed Anna's bet, their surface reflecting the rapidly changing odds displayed above. In his private office later that day, Professor Bren searched the Galactic database for Igloo, his scales turning a confused shade of green as he studied the simple dome structures. primitive ice buildings? That's their secret weapon. He closed the holographic display with a dismissive gesture. Tomorrow can't come soon enough. Time to put an end to these human fairy tales once and for all. Little did he know, Anna was at that moment sitting cross-legged in her dormitory, eyes closed, mentally reviewing every lesson her father had taught her about snow consistency, block cutting, and the precise angle needed for a perfect dome. Around her neck hung a simple carved pendant, a gift from her grandmother, bearing the ancient symbol of the polar bear guardian spirit of the frozen north. The storm systems on Frost 9 continued their eternal dance, unaware they were about to witness a lesson in human ingenuity that would be remembered in the annals of Galactic University for generations to come. The university's maintenance tunnels were eerily quiet at midnight. Anna's footsteps echoed softly as she made her way through the labyrinth of pipes and conduits, following the coordinates Blip had secretly shared. According to campus rumors, there was someone down here she needed to meet. "You're letting out all the warm air." Kid, the gravelly voice came from behind a tangle of thermal regulators. Anna spun around to find herself face to face with the strangest alien she'd ever seen. He was humanoid, but his skin seemed to shift and ripple like water caught in zero gravity. A patch on his gray maintenance uniform read Plex Rude. "You're the one who worked on Frost 9's original terraforming project?" Anna asked, trying to keep the excitement from her voice. Plex's liquid skin rippled with amusement. "Worked on it? Kid, I'm the reason that Iceball is even partially habitable. But more importantly," he pointed at her grandmother's pendant. "I recognize that symbol. Polar bear, right? Spirit of the frozen hunters." Anna's hand instinctively went to the pendant. "You know Earth symbols." "Know them?" Plex moved to a nearby maintenance panel, his fingers dancing across the controls. A hidden door slid open, revealing a room filled with old terraforming equipment and survey data. "I spent 5 years studying Earth's Arctic cultures before starting the Frost 9 project. Your species' cold weather adaptation techniques are fascinating." He pulled up a holographic display of Frost 9's surface. The storms create pressure variations that compress the snow into different densities, much like Earth's Arctic conditions, but on a much larger scale. The trick is finding the right consistency for building blocks. Anna finished, studying the atmospheric data. "Like how my father taught me to test snow density by feel." Plex's skin rippled with approval. "Smart kid. But you'll need more than knowledge where you're going. Show me your block cutting technique." For the next 6 hours, Anna practiced with simulated ice blocks while Plex critiqued her form. His liquid body would occasionally stretch out to adjust her stance or demonstrate a more efficient cutting angle. "The wind is your biggest enemy out there," he explained, showing her weather simulation after weather simulation. "But it can also be your friend. The right shelter shape creates a vacuum buffer that actually strengthens the structure." Anna nodded, already sketching designs based on traditional Igloo principles modified for Frost 9's conditions. As the first hints of dawn crept through the maintenance tunnel's ventilation shafts, Plex helped Anna gather her allowed equipment: basic thermal clothing, traditional bone-cutting tools, and a simple rope measure. "One last thing," he said, his liquid form rippling with what might have been concern. "Why are you really doing this?" Anna paused in her preparations. "Because every time humans reach for the stars, someone tells us we don't belong there. That we're too fragile, too primitive, too limited. But we've been proving them wrong since we first looked up at the sky and dreamed." Plex's skin swirled with colors she couldn't quite interpret. "You know what I learned studying Earth's Arctic peoples? They survived not because they were the strongest or most advanced, but because they were the most adaptable. They learned to work with the environment instead of fighting it." He handed her one final piece of equipment, a small case containing what looked like clear crystal sheets. Traditional Inuit snow goggles, modified for Frost 9's spectrum, completely analog technology, so they're legal for the challenge. The sheets are grown crystals, no different than what your ancestors carved from bone. Anna carefully packed the goggles. "Thank you, but why help me?" Plex's form settled into something resembling a smile. "Because in all my years studying alien species, I've never seen one with quite the same look in their eyes that humans get when someone tells them something's impossible." He checked the time display on the wall. "You should go. The transport leaves in 20 minutes. As Anna hurried through the tunnels, Plex called after her. "Oh, and kid, when you're picking your spot for the shelter, remember what your people always knew: sometimes the best place to build isn't where there's the least snow, but where it gathers naturally." Back in her quarters, Anna quickly changed into her thermal gear, the simple, approved type that would keep her from freezing instantly but offered no extra advantages. She looked at herself in the mirror, touched her grandmother's pendant for luck, and whispered an old Inuit prayer for guidance. Her personal communicator buzzed a message from Blip Odds, now 2,000 to 1. Half the faculty betting on emergency evacuation in first 30 minutes. Show them what humans can do. Anna smiled, gathering her tools. The sun was rising over the university's crystalline spires, and somewhere up there, Frost 9 was waiting. Time to teach the galaxy a lesson about human adaptability. The transport ship's bay doors opened with a hiss of escaping warmth, and Frost 9's brutal reality hit them like a physical wall. Even through their protective gear, the gathered students could feel the planet's murderous cold trying to reach their cores. Minus 122 degrees, with wind speeds at 180 kilometers per hour, Professor Bren announced through their communication system, his scales tight against his body, despite his temperature regulator working at maximum capacity. "Your 10-hour survival challenge begins now." The 7 participating students stepped onto the surface. Besides Anna, there were 2 Jovians, their gaseous forms already contracting against the cold, a Martian crystalline being who immediately started to crack in the temperature shift, 3 Venusians whose heat pods were radiating enough energy to melt the snow around their feet, and 1 very nervous-looking Europan who was already starting to solidify around the edges. 10 credits, says the human cuts and runs in the first 5 minutes, one of the Jovians transmitted, their gaseous form wavering in the wind. Anna ignored them, focusing instead on the snow beneath her feet. She pulled out a simple bone tool and dug down, testing the density and consistency of different layers. Plex's voice echoed in her memory: "Find where the snow gathers naturally." The observation drone circled overhead as she worked methodically, documenting her every move for the eager audience watching back at the university. Professor Bren's voice crackled over the comm. "Student McKnight appears to be playing in the snow. How characteristic of primitive survival techniques." But Anna wasn't playing. She was reading the landscape like her father had taught her, finding the spot where the wind patterns would work with her shelter instead of against it. There a natural depression where the snowdrifts showed the right consistency for cutting blocks. She took out her measuring rope, working quickly but carefully to mark out the precise spiral pattern needed for a proper igloo. The bone saw, carved to exactly the same specifications as the ones her ancestors had used for generations, bit into the snow with practiced precision. "Look, it's trying to cut the snow into shapes," one of the Venusians commented, their heat pod flickering with amusement. "How quaint." The first block came free, perfect density, perfect angle on the edges. Anna's hands moved with practiced efficiency, placing it exactly where it needed to go. The second block followed, then the third, each one slightly angled inward to create the beginning of the spiral. 2 hours in, the Martian student had to be evacuated, their crystalline form showing dangerous fracture patterns. The Europan followed shortly after, nearly frozen solid. But Anna kept working, her movements economical and precise, conserving energy while making steady progress. The blocks rose in a perfect spiral, each one locked to its neighbors by the precisely carved angles. The physics was simple but perfect, each block supported by the ones before it, the weight distributed exactly right to create a self-reinforcing structure. "Fascinating," Professor Bren muttered, forgetting his comm was still broadcasting. "The primitive technology is actually showing signs of geometric sophistication." 3 hours in, the Venusians had to combine their heat pods just to maintain basic functions. The Jovians were having trouble maintaining their form against the increasingly violent winds. But Anna's growing structure was already providing her shelter from the worst of the storm. "Notice how she's not fighting the wind," Blip commented from the observation station, their blob-like form pressed against the viewport. "The shape of her structure is actually using the air currents to strengthen itself." The key block came next, the one that would lock the entire dome together. Anna paused, taking a careful breath. Her father's voice seemed to whisper in her ear, "Patience, little bear. Let the snow tell you what it needs." perfect precision, she lifted the block into place. It settled with a soft sound that was lost in the howling wind, but Anna felt the shift as the entire structure locked together, becoming something greater than the sum of its parts. Only one more thing, she transmitted, her voice steady despite the cold trying to seep through her basic thermal gear. She cut the entrance tunnel at the perfect angle, another lesson from generations of Arctic survival. The wind hit it and created exactly the airflow pattern she needed, bringing the temperature inside the igloo up to a survivable level through simple physics and architectural wisdom. As she sealed the final blocks into place, the last Jovian student called for evacuation, their gaseous form dangerously close to liquefaction. The Venusians had already retreated, their heat pods nearly depleted. Professor Bren's voice cracked through the calm. While this primitive ice structure is certainly interesting from an anthropological perspective, surely you don't expect. His voice trailed off as Anna's sensor readings began broadcasting to the observation station. The temperature inside her shelter was rising steadily, the structure doing exactly what igloos had done for human ancestors for thousands of years, creating a microclimate that could sustain life in one of the most hostile environments imaginable. No artificial heating, she transmitted calmly. No advanced technology, just human ingenuity and knowledge passed down through generations of people who learned to live with the cold instead of trying to overpower it. The observation drone's footage showed the completed igloo standing proud against Frost 9's raging storm, its shape perfect in its simplicity, every block placed with the precision born of both ancient wisdom and deep understanding of environmental physics. 7 more hours to go, Anna transmitted cheerfully. Anyone want to come in out of the cold? There's plenty of room, and I could teach you some old Earth survival songs to pass the time. The silence on the comm channel was broken only by the howling of the wind and what sounded suspiciously like Professor Bren's temperature regulator having a nervous breakdown. The storm hit without warning. Not the regular winds of Frost 9, but something far worse. The observation station's sensors screamed as readings shot off the charts. Category 6 polar storm approaching, the automated system announced. All personnel must evacuate immediately. Professor Bren's scales turned ash gray as he watched the massive wall of ice and wind approaching on the sensors. Emergency protocol activated. All students returned to transport vessels immediately. But the transport ships had already sealed their doors, their pilots unwilling to risk the engines in such extreme conditions. The remaining 3 Venusians huddled together, their heat pods barely functioning. The 2 Jovian students, their gaseous forms now dangerously unstable, drifted helplessly in the strengthening winds. Professor Anna's calm voice cut through the panic on the comm channel. My shelter can hold more than just me. Send them here. Absolutely not. A primitive ice structure cannot possibly. With all due respect, Professor Anna interrupted, your temperature regulator is about to fail. I can hear it from here. The storm will last at least 2 hours according to the sensors. We can either work together or we can all freeze separately. Your choice. The first blast of the storm hit the observation station, making the reinforced walls creak. Professor Bren looked at his students, then at his failing temperature regulator, then at the simple ice dome standing strong against the worsening conditions. All students proceed to Student McKnight's shelter, he transmitted, his mouth tentacles curling around the unfamiliar concept. Observation team preparing for emergency. The transmission cut off as the station's external communications array froze solid. Anna stood in the entrance of her igloo, using her body to block the wind as the Venusians half stumbled, half crawled inside. Huddle together near the back wall, she instructed. Your heat pods will work better in here. The Jovians drifted in next, their gaseous forms immediately beginning to stabilize in the shelter's microclimate. Last came Professor Bren, his scales practically gray with cold, his temperature regulator sputtering and whining. This is most irregular, he managed, all 4 eyes blinking rapidly against the wind. Less talking, more moving, Anna said, guiding him inside before sealing the entrance with a precisely cut snow block. Now, everyone find a spot and stay still. Body heat, or whatever passes for it in your species, will help raise the temperature even more. The professor watched in bewilderment as the temperature readings on his partially functioning scanner began to rise. But this defies all known principles of xenobiological adaptation. a species with no natural cold resistance, creating a survivable environment in these conditions, using nothing but frozen water and primitive geometry. We call it working smarter, not harder, Anna said, checking on the Venusians, whose heat pods were already beginning to function more efficiently in the protected space. Humans figured out a long time ago that you don't always need fancy technology to solve problems. Sometimes you just need to understand how nature works and use it to your advantage. The storm raged outside, but inside the igloo, something remarkable was happening. The Jovians found they could maintain their form without constant energy expenditure. The Venusians' heat pods began recharging slowly. Even Professor Bren's scales started to return to their normal blue coloration. "Tell me, Student McKnight," the professor said quietly, after a particularly loud blast of wind made everyone huddle closer together, "where did you learn to build this structure?" "My father taught me, just like his father taught him," Anna replied, adjusting a snow block that had shifted slightly. "But really, I learned it from thousands of years of human history. Every culture that lived in cold climates figured out similar principles, how to work with the environment instead of against it." Professor Bren's secondary eyes focused on the perfectly curved walls, while his primary set studied his scanner. The engineering principles are fascinating. The angles, the weight distribution, the way it actually gets stronger as more snow builds up outside. "That's the beauty of it," Anna said. "It's not about conquering the environment. It's about becoming part of it, understanding it, respecting it." One of the Jovian students, their gaseous form now stable enough for communication, spoke up. "So when humans say they can adapt to any environment, we don't mean we can overpower it," Anna finished. "We mean we learn from it. Adapt to it. Find ways to survive not by being the strongest, but by being the smartest." Through a small viewing hole, they could see the storm beginning to ease. The observation station's lights flickered back on in the distance. But Professor Bren didn't immediately call for evacuation. Instead, all four of his eyes were fixed on his data pad, where he was rapidly making notes. "Perhaps," he said slowly, his scales shifting to a thoughtful shade of green, "we have been approaching the study of species adaptation from the wrong angle entirely. It seems there is much we could learn from primitive survival techniques." The Grand Assembly Hall of Galactic University had never been so packed. Students and faculty from every department crowded the space, their varied forms creating a living rainbow of colors, textures, and atmospheric effects. The buzz of excitement was almost tangible. On the central platform, Professor Kazik Bren stood before the assembled crowd, his scales a humble shade of blue-gray. Behind him, a holographic display showed footage from the Frost 9 challenge, focusing on a simple ice dome standing strong against one of the harshest storms ever recorded on the planet. "For 300 years," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall, "I have taught that species adaptation can be measured purely through technological advancement and biological capabilities. Today I stand before you to admit I was wrong." The hall erupted in surprised murmurs. Professor Bren was legendary for never admitting error in his scientific assessments. "Student McKnight," he continued, gesturing to where Anna sat in the front row, "has demonstrated that true adaptation comes not from overwhelming an environment with technology, but from understanding and working in harmony with it." The holographic display shifted to show thermal readings from inside the igloo during the storm. Using nothing but frozen water and geometric principles, a member of what we considered a limited species created a survival shelter that not only protected her but also saved the lives of 6 other students and myself. Blip, sitting beside Anna, wobbled with barely contained excitement. "Wait until he announces the betting pool results," they whispered. The odds calculations nearly burned out 3 quantum computers. Professor Bren's scales shifted to a more formal shade of purple. "In light of these findings, the Xenobiology Department is establishing a new research initiative, the Center for Traditional Survival Technologies. We will be studying the adaptation techniques of all species, with a particular focus on methods that demonstrate harmony with extreme environments." He paused, all 4 eyes focusing on Anna. "And I am pleased to announce that our first research fellow will be Student McKnight, whose demonstration of human adaptation capabilities has forced us to reevaluate our entire understanding of species classification." The applause was thunderous. Near the back of the hall, A familiar liquid form rippled with satisfaction. Plex Rude watched as his former employers from the Frost 9 terraforming project approached Anna with offers to consult on new colony designs. Furthermore, Professor Bren continued once the noise had died down. The Galactic University Board has approved a new addition to our survival training facilities. Thanks to a generous donation from the betting pool proceeds, we will be constructing a cold weather survival training center, featuring traditional techniques from various species. The centerpiece will be a permanent demonstration area for what we now call the McKnight shelter system. Anna touched her grandmother's pendant, thinking of all the generations of knowledge it represented. In the crowd, she spotted several human exchange students clutching admission letters to the xenobiology department, their faces shining with pride. Professor Bren's scales shifted through several colors before settling on a warm gold. But perhaps the most significant outcome of this experiment is not scientific at all. When the storm hit, student McKnight did not simply demonstrate survival. She showed us that true adaptation means helping others survive as well. Her shelter became a sanctuary for multiple species, each benefiting from a design that evolved through thousands of years of human trial and error. He turned to face Anna directly. You asked me if knowledge passed down through generations counted as technology. I now understand that such knowledge is something far more valuable. It is the accumulated wisdom of countless individuals who learn to see challenges not as obstacles to overcome, but as opportunities to adapt and grow. The holographic display showed one final image, the Igloo standing strong against the storm, its simple design a testament to human ingenuity. In conclusion, Professor Bren said, his voice carrying a new note of humility, I propose a modification to our xenobiological classification system. We will no longer rate species solely on their technological achievements or biological capabilities. Instead, we will consider their ability to adapt, to learn, to work with their environments, and most importantly, to share their knowledge for the benefit of all. As the assembly hall erupted in applause, Anna felt a tap on her shoulder. Blip handed her a credit chip, their blob-like form quivering with amusement. 2,000 to 1 odds, they whispered. Enough to fund an entire research department of your own. Not bad for a primitive survival technique. Anna smiled, looking around at the changed faces in the crowd. Where once she had seen dismissal and ridicule, she now saw curiosity and respect. Her grandmother's pendant caught the light, its ancient symbol a bridge between past and future. You know, she said to Blip, I think this is just the beginning. Imagine what we could learn from every species' traditional survival techniques. Not to replace modern technology, but to work alongside it. As the assembly hall buzzed with excited discussions about the future of xenobiology, a new message appeared on the university's announcement board now accepting applications for cross-species survival technique exchange program. All traditional knowledge welcome. The era of human adaptation had begun, not with a show of force or technological might, but with a simple ice dome and the timeless wisdom it represented.